Hi there, and welcome to Amy's Express CRO Tips series. So for today's presentation, I like to run through some things that you thought might be fabulous for a website design or for conversions that actually may be hurting you. So I like to run through some common disbeliefs really in the conversion world and shed some light and give you some thought. So let's get right into it. So the first thing to remember is web design is really like fashion. And while there are lots of trends out there and things that look in a certain way, which I will run through them, they won't necessarily stay for long. So rather than trying to follow the trends in like fashion, really try to move away from it and think what is best for your users. And I'll give you some examples of things that people use like fashion. So the first one is that people think that dark websites are classy and suave. And many landing pages do use dark and very dramatic colors, and often the background of the page or large sections of the site are really black or just have really dark saturated colors. And unfortunately, these kind of color choices often create a really dark and brooding atmosphere or imply something so exotic that it will only apply to a teenage male in like adrenaline junkies. So depending on your website, ideally you like to avoid the dark websites, because what dark websites actually do also is they take away focus from your actual content and it makes you focus on the actual decorations or things like that. So dark websites generally do look less trustful than light websites, even if it's a slight look, but generally as long as it's easy to read, it has a nice fresh look, it is much more ideal. So in this example here by Gilbert Tobin, you can see that there's a lot of white background with light text on top, which makes it very easy and looks very fresh and breathable. And if I go back to the previous site, you can actually see these two law firms have a very different feel to it. Because essentially the lighter websites do look more trustful and much more inviting, and essentially for a business website that's exactly what you want, for your website to look more inviting, because that will get you more customers in the end. Belief number 2 is that white text on black is easy to read. So now this is actually a very debatable comment, because what I find is white text on black is easy to read if your customer is the type of person who would actually be reading, your website in the dark, maybe on the bed or things like that. In that case, it is very easy because it's much more comfortable to the eyes. But for your business website, most people aren't reading in the dark. They're at a computer or in the office, typing away. And I have a little article here of just a website that was just taken as a screenshot of white text that is on black background. And while it's actually zoomed in, if you're looking at it now, it's actually quite tiring to read over time. Especially if the text is small like this. It is actually very, very hard to read because it's not comfortable. Your eyes are not used to it. So ideally, you can use white text on black backgrounds for large headings or just decorative items, but in terms of reading actual content, especially if it's like a few paragraphs, you should always ideally have a darker text on a light background, just to make it much more easier to read. Belief number 3 is that bright backgrounds lift the page up. I actually see this used a lot, and it is completely not correct. Black backgrounds may lift the page, but it also takes your attention away from your page, away from your content. And I have an example here by Westpac, which I've just juxtaposed a red background, and this is not actually what they have. But as you can see, if they chose to put red in the background, you can see how much attention it takes away from the actual rest of the site. As you can see, it's actually really hard to read, and you can't focus on things. You're reading maybe the information on the left hand side, and the red it's just not very comfortable, and not only does it not make the page pop up, it actually just distracts everything completely. And here's actually what the site looks like originally, which is a grey tone, and you can actually also already see just with that little flicker, you can see how much the content actually pops up. And you can also play around with it. I tried to put it in white background just to see how that looks, and that even pops up even more. So really experiment and just play with different colors and see what works best. But generally the light backgrounds work most because you don't look at a plain white background. There's nothing to focus there. So therefore you focus on the copy and the content and the calls to action, and that's exactly what you want. If I just go back to the red one, you see the find out more under here. See how that kind of blends into the rest of the background, doesn't stand anymore, but if we put a white background or a grey background, it stands out much more, and that's exactly what you want, especially for important call to actions. Okay, so another belief is that sliding banners communicate more and that they're great. So there's a lot of debate on this, and I know sliding banners are very popular because they seem to be the really big trend recently. However, they don't actually, help you as much as you think they do. Reason why is because when people enter a website, especially a homepage, they don't sit and look and watch at the sliding banner to see what you're trying to sell them. They will be scanning the rest of your page, maybe looking at sale items or what's on offer for your navigation item instead. But what this sliding banner does is, because it's moving, especially the automatic ones, as you're looking at something, your eyes can't help but drop back and forth because it is sliding. So essentially they can overwhelm the user and be just really distractive completely. But in some cases, you just have to use a sliding banner, and there are certain ways to make sure you do it right. So one thing is really, if you can do it right, is not to make it automatic. Give people the control, or making sure it moves very slowly, maybe at least 10 seconds, so people have time to actually read and look at the images on the page and really take it in. And rather than putting a selling point like an advertisement, because people now, as you know, with advertising on the web, people are kind of inclined just to ignore it, just as how they're kind of conditioned to be. So what you want to do is, for your text that you put on the page, is really feature your unique selling points, or why you're better than your competitors, or maybe a certain feature or benefit of your site. As essentially, you don't want to make it too salesy because you don't want people to ignore it, and of course make it nice and clean so people aren't spending too much time looking at it and being distracted by other things instead of your products. Another way to do is maybe use people who have eye contact, because that will draw attention, but essentially you should really keep the page quite clean, just like this example here, where it's just like light greys and there's certain calls to action which kind of gets copied over the place. If possible, show nice big thumbnails just of different things that they can click to, so they have more control, because everyone likes being in control and nobody likes not being in control, essentially. So if you must use sliding banners, I suggest you do those things. Another belief that is done a lot is that people believe that small text looks modern and clean, and I have a lot of my own clients who actually believe this, and what they don't understand is that small text is so hard to read, because actually on a computer screen it's already much more difficult to read compared to if you're reading a handheld book, and because of the lights and so on forth. So that's also why there's like the zoom functions on browsers these days. So essentially, while yes, small text will make your page look clean, because essentially there's nothing on there, it's quite hard to read, but you don't need to use small text to make a website look nice and clean. You can adjust the size to make it bigger. You can adjust the line height. So the line height is the distance between the sentences, so it's like this white space here. You can add white space on the left and right and under the headings and so on forth, and that really makes the page nice and clean. I recommend your font size should be no smaller than 11 or 12 points. In pixels, I think that'll be about 13 pixels or so on forth, approximate figure, because mostly anything underneath that is just very painful, especially if you're on people who are browsing on the mobile as well. As the text will be a lot smaller in the mobile screen, so you want to accommodate that market as well, and also through responsive designs. The next belief is the more information, the better. And in this case, not really. It's actually the more quality information, the better. So you always see some landing pages out there. Some are very long, some are long squeeze pages, and some maybe only have like a 2-page fulls. So there is no really answer for who is wrong, who is right in this case. It really depends on your product. If you're a high quality, prestigious product that is quite complicated, you might actually be required to provide more information so people don't research elsewhere. However, if you're a product that is quite simple and to the point, you don't need that much information. And it also depends on how your type of customers. If they're a very conversation type, if they like to discuss, you might actually have a very long sales copy page which has a very conversational tone to sell the product. So this really depends on your customer, but the general overview is the more quality information, the better. And how you lay it out is quite important as well. You know, you might want to use headings just to break up a long page. You might want to use bullet points or even colors or graphics, and that will make the page not seem so overwhelming. So remember, always focus on quality, quality, quality. Another belief is that some people believe that customers get turned on by choice. I think generally we could actually say this is not the case. I have a little quote here, which I just found on the internet, that describes that choice can be a good thing, but too much can make it more difficult to decide. And a classic example is a menu. Like generally the background here, you have like a general picture, which is great, you know, it's like a general menu. But imagine if you had 20 of these type of pages with different menu items. That would be so difficult to choose. And you know, you wouldn't do this in real life, so you wouldn't do that for your website. But in some cases, maybe your business has a lot of choices and, you know, different packages and things. But there are certain ways and strategies that you can use so that customers can really, you know, make the choice easier. And if I use the example of a pricing chart, you can really make decision making much more mindless, which is ideal. So, you know, in this example here, they have quite a lot of plans, but under one they have like a little recommended sign, which features, and it just really draws your attention. And the good thing about this, laying it out like this as well, is, you know, because it's in the middle somewhere, this one, $9 here, looks really cheap, and this one looks quite expensive. So anything in between is really the general gist that people quite like. So it's a really good way to present things as well. So instead of recommended, you might actually use social proofing, and you might use popular, or most recently bought, or 50 other people bought this pack in the last week. And that just really makes it much easier compared to if you just present all your options on the page. So remember, these are the myths and common mistakes to avoid and believe in. So dark websites are classy and suave because they really create gloomy look. White text and black is easy to read. Bright backgrounds lift the page. Sliding banners communicate more. Small text looks modern and clean. More information the better, and customers get on by choice. So if you have any of these beliefs, you need to switch them to, you need to avoid dark designs if possible, unless your designs are for a certain market, which is teenagers or people who read their stuff in the dark. And same with never have white text on the black for reading copy, but it's okay for, you know, heading and decorative purposes. Keep background colors light and simple so they don't take attention away from your page. Use sliding banners the right way, so to feature unique selling points, not necessarily always selling points, because people will ignore advertisements, and make sure they're very graphically prominent as well. Essentially, sliding banners or any of the top featured banners should really just communicate what your website does in a very simple terms, so the customers look at it and be like, yes, I've entered the right place. Number 5, make sure text is comfortable to read in terms of the font size. Make sure they're ample size. Remember, mobile users as well, and use lots of white space. It's always very comfortable and a very good idea, and that also adds to the modern look. Always focus on quality and not quantity, so make sure you ask yourself who are your users so you can adjust it to them, and make decision making mindless as possible. So really direct them and say, this is the most popular. Use social proving, use anything that you need to do just to direct them in a certain way. And therefore that way, by following these things, you'll create a design that is much more better in terms of your conversion rates and so forth moving forward. So thank you for watching, and if you have any questions, leave them in the comment section below, or you can connect with me on LinkedIn with my URL here with any questions you have, and I'll be happy to answer them. Happy conversion rate optimizationing.